Sometimes one sentence can shatter your entire life. The day my own son looked me in the eyes and said, "Just die." I don't give a shit something inside me broke forever. I walked away that night, but I didn't disappear. No. I rebuilt myself, and after a month, I came back stronger than ever. What happened next? How? I survived, stayed strong, and took my revenge is a story you need to hear till the very end. Stick with me, and if you're new here, subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next chapters of this journey, because trust me, you won't believe how it ends. There are words in life you never forget. Some words tattoo themselves on your soul like scars that never fade. For me, those words came from the very person I love the most. My son. It was late. The house was quiet except for the low hum of the ceiling fan. We had been arguing, but nothing could have prepared me for what came out of his mouth. His eyes, cold and sharp, cut into me as he spat the words. "Just die." I don't give a shit. I froze. The world stopped spinning. For a second, I thought maybe I had misheard him. Maybe the anger had twisted his tone. Maybe the exhaustion in my head was playing tricks. But no, he meant it. Every syllable. My chest tightened like a fist. Was squeezing my heart. I had carried him inside me, felt his first kicks, held his hand on his first day of school. I had sacrificed everything, my sleep, my dreams, my peace, just so he could have more. And in return, he gave me this. That night, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a grave. I didn't scream. I didn't beg. I didn't ask him why. I just turned around, picked up my bag, and left. My footsteps echoed in the hallway, each step heavier than the last. The door clicked shut behind me, and with it, a chapter of my life slammed closed. The world outside was dark and empty, but inside I felt darker. It wasn't just pain, it was betrayal. And betrayal from your own blood is a wound deeper than any knife. For days I wandered like a ghost. No appetite, no words, just silence. People around me asked, "What's wrong?" But how could I explain? How could I say? My son wishes me dead without shattering completely. Everywhere I went, memories haunted me. The park bench where I used to watch him play as a child. The kitchen where I stayed up nights cooking his favorite meals. The bed where I used to sit by him humming lullabies when he was sick. Each memory mocked me now. Each memory whispered, "You gave him everything, and he gave you nothing." I cried in places no one could see, behind bathroom doors, in empty streets at night, into my pillow until it was soaked. But no matter how much I cried, the words wouldn't wash away. But here's the thing about heartbreak: it either destroys you or it remakes you. One morning, after a night of endless tears, I stood in front of the mirror. My eyes were swollen, my face pale. I looked like someone who's already dead, and that's when it hit me. Maybe he wanted me to die. Maybe he wanted me to disappear. But why? Should I give him that satisfaction? Why should I let his words bury me alive? I whispered to my reflection, "No, I will not die. I will not break. I will rise." And from that day, something inside me shifted. The first step wasn't easy. I had to teach myself to breathe again, to eat again, to walk without shaking. Every morning I forced myself to get up, to go outside, to reclaim the air that belonged to me. I started small walks in the park, reading books, writing my feelings down in a journal. Slowly, I remembered who I was before the world told me I was just a mother. I was a woman, I was strong, I was capable, and I wasn't finished yet. With every passing day, I rebuilt myself piece by piece, stronger, sharper, tougher, and deep inside a seed of something else began to grow. Not just survival, not just strength, but revenge. You see, revenge isn't always about anger. Sometimes it's about balance, about making the universe feel the same weight you carried. He had taken my love for granted. He had broken me without a second thought. Now it was my turn to show him what happens when you break the wrong person. This wasn't about hate anymore. It was about power. And for the first time in a long time, I felt alive. That first month was the hardest month of my life. I Went from being a mother who was broken, abandoned, and dismissed to a woman standing tall with fire in her veins. The pain didn't vanish, it never does, but pain became my weapon, and when the time came, I would use it, because the story didn't end with him saying just die. The story truly began the night I decided to live and fight back what happens after your own child tells you to die. For 30 days, I lived like a shadow, broken, silent, but secretly rebuilding myself. This month changed everything. Because sometimes silence doesn't mean weakness, it means preparation. The night I walked out of my son's house, I carried no luggage. Just my bag, my heavy heart, and the echo of his words stabbing me again and again. The room I rented was small, barely enough for a bed and a chair. The paint was peeling, and the air smelled of dust. But it was mine, a place where no one could see me break. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. My body was tired, but my mind refused to rest. His voice played on repeat. Just die, I don't give a shit. The sentence cut me into pieces, each sharper than the last. I thought I was strong, but in that moment, I was just a broken Shelley, cried until my throat was raw, but even the tears eventually dried, leaving behind only silence. The first week passed like I was underwater, drowning, but still breathing. Morning came and went, but I didn't notice meals tasted like ash. I would sit with food in front of me and push it around the plate until it went cold. At night, I decurl into myself, clutching the pillow like it was the only thing keeping me from falling apart. But the hardest part wasn't the hunger or the loneliness or even the tears. The hardest part was the questions. What did I do wrong? Was I such a terrible mother? Did he ever truly love me? Or was it all in my head? If even my son doesn't need me, what is the point of living? Questions spun in circles louder than any noise outside. One morning, I woke up and decided I needed to at least move. I made myself tea. The steam curled into the air, soft and warm. I held the cup in both hands, and for the first time in days, I felt something close to comfort. It wasn't much, but it was enough to remind me that life had not ended. After tea, I stepped outside. The air smelled of earth and rain. Children ran in the streets, their laughter echoing like a song I had forgotten. For a moment, I envied them. For a moment, I remembered when my son was that small, when his laughter was my world. But then the memory cut me again, so I kept walking, step by step, block by block, as if the ground itself could carry some of my pain away. By the second week, I couldn't keep the storm inside anymore. My heart was too heavy, so I bought a small notebook and began to write every night before sleeping. I poured my soul onto the page. Dear son, you hurt me more than anyone else ever could. Dear son, I carried you for 9 months, but today I carry only your cruelty. Dear son, maybe you don't care if I live or die, but I do. And I will not let your words be the end of me. Some nights my hands shook so hard I could barely hold the pen. Other nights the words spilled out faster than I could write them. The journal became my silent friend. It didn't judge, it didn't interrupt it. Just took my pain and held it for me. Around the 3rd week, something strange happened. I was walking through the market when I saw a boy shouting at his mother. She stood there quietly, head bowed, taking his anger. I froze. My heart clenched because I saw myself in her, a mother beaten down by the words of her child. And in that moment, something shifted inside me. I whispered under my breath, never again. I will never bow my head to cruelty again. It was small, just a whisper, but it was enough to light a spark. From that day, my mind changed. I stopped asking why he said those words. Instead, I asked, what does he value most? What happens if he sees me stronger, not weaker? How can I take back the power he thought he stole from me? I didn't have all the answers yet, but I knew one thing: I wasn't going to die. Not in body, not in spirit. No, I was going to rise on the 30th day. I stood in front of the mirror again. The face staring back at me was not the same woman who had walked out broken a month ago. Yes, my eyes were tired. Yes, my soul was scarred. But behind those scars was a fire that no insult, no betrayal could ever put out. I touched the glass and whispered, "This is not the end. This is the beginning, and for the men now." First time in a long time, I believed it. The silent month did not heal me, but it forged me. Pain became fuel. Loneliness became strength. Silence became preparation. When I left that month behind, I was no longer just a mother who had been broken. I was a woman reborn with fire in her veins and revenge in her heart. The world had no idea what was coming. Woman who entered that silent month was broken, but the woman who walked out was someone new. Stronger, harder, sharper. This was the beginning of my rebirth, a journey where every scar became a weapon and every wound became my armor. When I left my son's house, I carried not just my bag, but also the weight of years of sacrifice, years of bending myself into pieces for others, years of living only as someone's mother. In that one cruel sentence, all of it shattered. And in the 30 days of silence, I realized something I had been living as less than myself. That realization was painful, but it was also freeing. If the old me had already died in his eyes, then what was stopping me from creating someone new? I stood in front of the mirror and whispered to my reflection, "The old me is gone. From today, I will rise as someone stronger." The first step of my rebirth was my body. I had neglected myself for years, always feeding others first, always putting myself last. My body had carried the weight of stress, sadness, and exhaustion. Now it was time to rebuild. I began with walking. Each morning I pushed myself to go farther. At first my legs ached and my breath came short, but day by day my strength grew. The more I walked, the lighter my heart felt. Then I added stretches, movements that made my bones remember they were alive. Then simple exercises, push-ups, squats, lifting. Whatever weights I could find. It wasn't about becoming perfect. It was about reminding myself that my body belonged to me, not to sorrow, not to weakness, not to anyone else. Every drop of sweat was a tear leaving my body. Every ache in my muscles was proof I was rebuilding. I didn't just feel stronger, I looked stronger. And that mattered because the new me needed to be seen. But a body alone is not enough. My mind had been poisoned by his words. So I trained it too. Every night I read, not just novels, but books on strength, on survival, on people who rose from betrayal. I devoured stories of warriors, survivors, women who refused to stay down when the world crushed them. I wrote daily affirmations in my journal. I am not weak. His words do not define me. I am fire, not ash. At first, they felt like lies, but the more I repeated them, the more they became true. I meditated too. I sat in silence, not the painful silence of the first month, but a silence. I controlled a silence that healed, not destroyed. Slowly, the noise of my doubts faded, and in its place came clarity. By the second month, I no longer cried when I remembered his words. Instead, I felt fire. A fire that said, "You will not bury me, I will bury your words instead." I started to imagine the future not as a victim, but as someone who would rise above him, not just survive him, but show him that his cruelty created something unstoppable. This wasn't just about revenge anymore, it was about power. He wanted me gone, but I was still here, and now I was stronger than ever. I began to change my appearance too. Not for vanity, but for identity. I bought clothes that reflected the woman I was becoming, bold colors, sharper lines. I cut my hair shorter and fiercer, so every time I looked in the mirror, I didn't see the broken mother. I saw the warrior rising from the ashes. Even my walk changed. No more shuffling with eyes down. I walked tall, head high, like the world itself should move aside. People noticed, strangers looked at me differently. For the first time in years, I felt visible, not as someone's mother, not as someone's shadow, but as me. With my body strong, my mind clear, and my spirit reborn, I began the next stage, planning revenge. Is not about rage. Rage burns fast and then dies. Revenge is about patience, about waiting, about striking when the time is right. I asked myself, what does he love more than me? What would hurt him the way he hurt me? How do I show him that the mother he dismissed is now the woman he fears? I wrote it all Down, I didn't rush, I didn't act yet, I simply prepared. Because my rebirth wasn't just about surviving, it was about becoming the storm one. Night months after leaving, I stood in front of the mirror again. This time I didn't see scars, I saw strength. My shoulders were straighter, my eyes sharper, my lips curved, not in sadness, but in determination. I whispered to my reflection. He thought he buried me, but he didn't know I was a seed, and now I've grown into something he cannot destroy, the woman who left. Broken had died in her place, stood someone reborn, a woman of fire, a mother no longer begging for love, but a warrior ready to take what was hers. This was my rebirth, and soon he would see it. Rebirth means nothing if you stay still. Strength means nothing if you don't use it. So I made my choice. I would not remain in the shadows. I would move quietly at first, then louder. My first steps were small, but each one carried the weight of revenge. For weeks my mind had been sharpening like a blade. I had written plans, I had whispered affirmations. I had trained my body and rebuilt my spirit. But a plan means nothing without action. And action, no matter how small, is where everything begins. I told myself, don't rush, don't stumble. Every storm starts as a whisper of wind. So I started small. I began by watching him, not physically stalking. I didn't need to people talk, neighbors gossip. Social media tells more than you'd imagine. I listened quietly. I observed carefully. I learned his patterns, where he went, who he met, what he valued, money, status, friends. Pride, piece by piece, I gathered the puzzle of his life. And the more I learned, the more I saw the cracks. Cracks he didn't even know were there. One night I sat with my journal and wrote 2 lists. His strengths, the things that gave him power, his arrogance, his money, his social circle, his weaknesses, the things that could break him, his need for approval, his quick temper, his blind spots. When I finished, I stared at the second list and felt something I hadn't felt in months: control, because knowing his weaknesses meant I no longer had to feel like the powerless one. I could turn them against him. Revenge isn't about one big strike. It's about testing the waters step by step to see how the enemy reacts. So I made my first move. It was small, simple, barely noticeable, but it was enough to send a ripple into his world. I won't say what it was yet, because the power of a story lies in mystery, but let's just say it was something that made him question himself, something that unsettled him, though he couldn't put a finger on why. For me, it wasn't about the damage yet. It was about practice. Could I step into this new skin without shaking? And when I saw the effect, when I saw that ripple, I realized something. Yes, I could. With that one move, my fear began to fade. I had thought for so long that I was weak, that I was just the woman he dismissed, but now I could see it. He wasn't untouchable. Every person has a thread that once pulled begins to unravel the whole fabric of their life. I just had to find his, and I would each morning when I looked into the mirror, I saw less of the broken mother and more of the strategist. I no longer woke with tears. I woke with plans. I no longer walked with my head down. I walked like a woman carrying secrets. Even my smile changed. It wasn't the soft smile of a mother anymore. It was sharper, quieter, a smile that hid storms behind it. And I liked that. I liked the new meat night when the world was quiet. I sat with my notebook and wrote down not just plans, but feelings. I no longer fear him. He cannot break what is already rebuilt. I will not strike all at once. I will cut him slowly, piece by piece, until he feels the pain he gave me. The words weren't just notes. They were promises. Promises to myself, promises to the universe. Each line made my blood burn hotter, my spine stand straighter. This was no longer survival. This was war. In the daytime, I was quiet, ordinary, blending in with the world. But inside, I carried another life, the life of a woman plotting her first true strike. No one around me knew. To them, I was just someone trying to rebuild. A woman walking in the park, reading books, sipping tea, but beneath the surface, my heart beat to a new rhythm, the rhythm of revenge, and carrying that secret gave me strength, because for the first time, I wasn't powerless, I was in control. Then came the moment. I had been waiting for the first sign that my quiet moves had reached him. He looked unsettled. Small things went wrong in his world. Things that he couldn't explain, things that made him restless. I knew then he felt it, the shift, the ground beneath him beginning to tremble. And I smiled to myself, not in cruelty, but in satisfaction, because he had no idea where it was coming from. He had no idea that the woman he told to just die was the one pulling the strings. The first move wasn't the loudest, it wasn't the most painful, but it was the beginning, and beginnings matter, because in that moment, I knew I wasn't just surviving. I was hunting. The first move had been made, and the rest would follow one after another until his whole world crumbled. A single move can shake a person, but a web of moves that can destroy them once. I learned how fragile his world really was. I stopped waiting. I began to weave. Slowly, carefully, one thread at a time, until he was trapped in a web he couldn't escape from. The first move was small, but its effect lingered. He was unsettled just enough to lose balance, and that's when I realized one ripple isn't enough. I needed waves. So I began weaving, not rushing, not careless, every thread of the web placed with precision. I kept watching his daily life, his interactions, his weaknesses. People reveal themselves in the little things, and in the little things I found goldness. Pride made him reckless. His friends weren't true, they were allies of convenience. His anger controlled him more than he controlled. I didn't need to strike with fists or scream with words. I only needed to pull the right strings. I started with his image. He cared about how others saw him. Respect, status, appearance, these were his shields. So I began making small cuts in that shield. A rumor here, a half-truth whispered there, tiny seeds of doubt planted in the ears of people he trusted. I never lied, I didn't have to. The truth twisted just slightly is more dangerous than any lie. Soon people around him began to question him, not loudly, but silently, with side glances, with whispers, with silence, where there used to be applause, and he felt it. Prideful people don't handle doubt well. He began snapping more often, raising his voice at friends, growing paranoid. He didn't realize it yet, but the mask he wore was cracking, and every crack revealed the truth. He was weaker than he wanted the world to believe. Once I saw the first crack, I moved to the second thread. This one wasn't about his image, it was about his comfort. I disrupted his routines, little things small enough that he couldn't prove it was anyone's doing, but big enough to disturb his peace. Bills, misplaced appointments, forgotten opportunities slipping through his fingers. Each mistake made him look unreliable. Each failure pulled his pride lower. And still he had no idea where it was coming from. For the first time in months, I felt something powerful control. The same man who had once looked me in the eyes and said just die was now stumbling in the dark, unsure of his own footing. He didn't know I was the shadow behind it. He didn't know that the woman he dismissed was the one weaving his downfall. And that secrecy gave me strength. I didn't need to scream my power, I only needed to live it. Every night I returned to my journal. Page after page, I mapped his world like a spider weaving lines across a web. If I pull this, he loses that friend. If I push here, he stumbles in his work. If I cut this, his pride bleeds. The plans grew. Sharper, the vision clearer, and the more I wrote, the calmer I felt. Not because I hated him, but because I had balance again. By the end of the month, the web was no longer invisible. He felt it. You could see it in his eyes, the restlessness, the suspicion. He snapped at small things, doubted his own shadow, lost his temper over details. He was trapped in threads. He couldn't see threads. I had spun carefully around him, and that was the beauty of it. He didn't know the web was mine. One evening I stood before the mirror again. The woman staring back at me was no longer broken, no longer silent. She was calculating, sharp, unstoppable. I whispered to my reflection, the web is weaving. And soon he will learn a mother's silence is not surrender, it is the calm. Before the storm, the web was not complete yet, but it was tightening, and with every thread he struggled more. With every move, his pride cracked deeper. I didn't need to shout. I didn't need to reveal myself. I only needed patience because soon he would. Not just feel the web, he would be caught in it. And when that moment came, he would know exactly who will fight it. Web can only stretch so far before it snaps. And when it snaps, it doesn't free you, it traps you tighter. That's what happened to him. The cracks became fractures, the whispers became storms, and his pride began to collapse. This was his breaking point, the moment he finally began to feel what I had felt. I had been patient, careful. Each move was calculated, each thread of the web woven with precision, and then one day I noticed something different in him. It wasn't just frustration anymore, it was fear. His voice carried an edge, not of arrogance, but of desperation. His eyes darted more often, scanning the room as if shadows were watching. His laughter came forth sharp and empty. The man who once told me to just die now looked like someone fighting invisible ghosts, and I smiled. Because those ghosts were mine. It began with his friends. The ones he thought loyal slowly pulled away. Not because I begged them to, not because I lied, but because I gave them just enough truth, just enough whispers to see what kind of man he really was. I didn't shout his flaws, I simply revealed them. A broken promise here, a careless word there. People notice more than they admit, and once they see a crack, they can't unsee it soon. His circle grew smaller. And for a man who thrived on attention, that silence was torture. Then came the failures. Work slipping through his fingers, opportunities missed. Small mistakes piling up until even he couldn't deny them. He tried to cover them, but pride doesn't cover wounds, it exposes them. His temper grew shorter, his excuses grew louder, and the more he tried to hold control, the more it slipped away. I didn't have to push hard, I only had to let him stumble on his own weight. I knew the breaking point was near when I saw the loneliness in his eyes. People weren't answering his calls as quickly. Friends who once cheered for him now avoided his presence. At gatherings, he stood slightly apart, smiling too wide, talking too much, desperate to prove he was still someone, but I knew the truth. He was becoming what he made me once feel, unwanted, alone, forgotten, and for the first time he was tasting the same. Bitterness he had poured into my mouth. One night, I caught a glimpse of him from afar. He was sitting alone in a cafe, head buried in his hands. His shoulders slumped, his arrogance gone. I had seen that posture before in my own mirror the night I left. And in that moment, I realized something powerful. The cycle had turned. He was now where I once was. He was now the broken one. The only difference, I had risen from it. He was still falling. That night, I opened my journal and wrote once he told me to die today. I saw him look half dead already, not in body but in spirit. His mask has cracked and the man beneath it is weaker than he ever let me see. This is not cruelty, this is justice, this is balance. And for the first time I slept peacefully. The next morning I stood in front of a mirror again, but this time I didn't see just strength, I saw purpose. The woman staring back at me wasn't chasing revenge out of hate. Anymore, she was claiming it as a right to balance the scales, he thought. My silence was weakness, I whispered to the reflection, but silence was my weapon, and now he bleeds from it. The final thread of the web came when his pride collapsed publicly. It happened at a gathering where he tried to boast, tried to reclaim his image, but instead of admiration, he was met with silence, a few glances, a few smirks. And then someone, emboldened by the whispers I had planted, questioned him, not loudly, not rudely, just enough to strip his mask away. He stumbled, his voice cracked. His anger flared, and in that moment, everyone saw it. The man was not as strong as he pretended to be. That was it, the breaking point. His pride shattered in front of the very people he craved approval from. I didn't clap. I didn't cheer. I didn't reveal myself. I only watched quietly as the man who once told me to just die stood there exposed, powerless, broken. And in that silence, I won. Revenge isn't always loud. Sometimes it's in silence, in the cracks that spread until a person collapses under their own weight. The breaking point wasn't about destroying him in one strike, It was about letting him destroy himself with just a little push from me. And he had. The web was complete. The trap had closed. For months, I was a shadow in his life, weaving webs, pulling strings, breaking him piece by piece. But shadows can't stay hidden forever. There comes a moment when silence must end, when you must step into the light and show the enemy exactly who you've become. This was that moment, the day I finally stood face to face with my Sony had imagined this moment 1,000 times. What I would say, what he would look like, how he would react when he finally realized the truth that the mother he dismissed was the storm behind his downfall. But imagination is one thing, reality is another. The universe chose the time for me. I didn't plan the confrontation. It unfolded naturally as if fate itself wanted the curtain to rise. It happened at a gathering, not a big event, not a celebration, just a quiet dinner among people who once knew both of us. I walked in dressed, not as the broken woman who left that night, but as the reborn one. Strong posture, calm eyes, silent fire. He was already there, I saw him. Before he saw me, and in that moment my heart clenched because for all the strength I had built, a part of me still remembered this was my son. The boy I once carried, once kissed goodnight, once sacrificed everything for. But then I remembered his words, just die, I don't give a shit. And the fire returned. When his eyes finally landed on me, I saw it, the flicker of shock. For a second, he froze, his mouth open then closed. His pride tried to cover it with a smirk, but his eyes betrayed him because he didn't recognize me, not fully. He recognized my face, yes, but not the woman standing before him. The mother he dismissed was gone. In her place stood someone he could not control. He approached me slowly, forcing a smile, his voice trying to sound casual, cracked slightly. You look different. I held his gaze, calm, steady. Yes, because I am. He laughed nervously. So you're back. After disappearing like that, I tilted my head. No, I didn't disappear. I transformed. There's a difference. The table around us went quiet. People could sense the tension, but they pretended not to. And in that silence, I leaned closer and whispered, "Do you remember the last words you said to me?" His smirk faltered, his eyes darted away. Yes, I continued softly but firmly. You told me to die, that you didn't give a shit, and so I left. But tell me, my son, how does it feel now to be the one who is dying inside his face turned pale. I didn't need to scream. I didn't need to insult him. My calmness was louder than any anger could ever be, because in that moment he realized the cracks in his life, the whispers, the failures, the loneliness, they weren't accidents. They were the consequences of his own cruelty, magnified by the mother he thought he had buried. And now he was looking straight into the eyes of the woman who had risen from the grave. He dug for her, stuttered, searching for words. I didn't mean it. I was angry. You know how I get excuses, always excuses. I smiled, not warmly, but sharply. Yes, you were angry, and in your anger you threw away the one person who would have stood by you until the end. You told me to die, and now you are watching the death of your pride, your power, your control. Do you understand that, my son? This is your mirror. This is what you gave me reflected back to you. His hands trembled. His jaw tightened. He wanted to fight, but he couldn't. Because deep down he knew it was true. I didn't need to humiliate him further. I didn't need to destroy what little was left of him in that room, because the real victory wasn't in breaking him. It was in standing there face to face and showing him that he no longer had power over me. I had risen, I had survived, and I had turned his cruelty into my strength. I leaned closer so only he could hear and said one final line. You told me to die, but I lived, and that my son is my revenge. I didn't stay for the rest of the dinner. I didn't need to. I stood tall and silent and walked out. Behind me, the whispers began. People had seen enough to know the truth. His mask had fallen, his pride lay shattered, and me. I walked into the night with my head high, my heart steady. Not broken, not silent, but free face to face. I didn't scream. I didn't strike, I didn't collapse. I stood, I spoke, I won, because revenge isn't always about making someone bleed. Sometimes it's about making them see the blood on their own hands. And that night, my son saw it. Revenge doesn't end when you win, it echoes, it spreads. The night I walked away from him face to face, I thought it was over, but in truth, that was only the beginning of the aftermath, the part where the storm I unleashed rippled through both our lives. That night, as I walked away from the dinner, I expected relief. I expected the satisfaction of victory to fill me like a fire, but instead I felt something else. Quiet. Not silence like before, not the silence of emptiness. This was a silence of release. For the first time since that night he told me to die, I felt the weight on my chest lift. The chains were gone. Because I had spoken my truth to his face, and he could never erase it. When I got home, I stood in front of the mirror once more. The woman looking back at me wasn't just reborn, now she was complete. I whispered softly, almost in disbelief, "You did it. You faced him, and you didn't break." Tears filled my eyes. Not the tears of pain from months ago. These were tears of strength, of survival, of victory. For the first time in a long time, I smiled at myself, a real smile, and the days that followed the consequences began to ripple. The whispers from the dinner spread. People talked. They had seen the mask fall, seen him stumble, seen him silenced by the woman he once dismissed. His pride couldn't survive that. His circle grew even smaller. The friends who stayed began to doubt him more openly. At work, he made mistakes he couldn't hide anymore. His anger, his paranoia, his cracks, they all showed. The man who once stood tall was shrinking, not because I pushed harder, but because his own world was now pulling him down. And the best part, one didn't have to move a finger anymore. The web I had woven was holding tight on its own. Revenge is strange. You think it will taste sweet, but it tastes different. Not sugar, not fire. More like steel, sharp, cold, final. I don't feel joy in his suffering. I feel balance. I feel free. That's what I wrote in my journal the week after our confrontation, because I realized something important. My revenge wasn't about destroying him completely. It was about taking back what was stolen from me, my strength, my dignity, my voice, and I had. But victory brings a strange question. What now? For months, my entire existence had been fueled by the fire of revenge. It had given me purpose, strength, and clarity. Now, with the confrontation behind me, I stood in a new silence, not empty, not heavy, just unfamiliar. If I was no longer defined by his cruelty, then who was I? The answer both frightened and excited me. I was free to decide. I began to rebuild, but this time not in the shadows of pain. I started writing more, not just in my journal, but in ways that could inspire others. I started connecting with people again, not as a broken mother, but as a woman who had walked through fire and come out the other side. I even started laughing again. Real laughter, not forced, not broken. The more I lived, the more I realized revenge had been the bridge. But beyond that bridge lay something greater, rebirth into freedom. What about him? He tried once to reach out, a message that said we should talk. I didn't reply because what was left to say, words had already been spoken. Actions had already been taken, and the truth was I didn't need him anymore. The woman I had become was no longer waiting for his apology. I didn't need his validation. I didn't even need his presence in my life. He had become nothing more than a shadow of a memory. One evening, months later, I stood in front of the mirror again. This time I didn't whisper to myself. I just looked, and I saw not pain, not revenge, not even survival. I saw freedom. The woman in the mirror was no longer chained to her past, no longer defined by betrayal. She was whole, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. Revenge gave me strength, confrontation gave me freedom, but the aftermath gave me something even greater, freedom. Because in the end, revenge isn't the destination. It's just the road that leads you back to yourself, and I had found myself again when the dust of revenge settled. I felt something unusual, calm. Not the heavy, suffocating calm of heartbreak, not the tense, waiting calm of planning. This was different. This was peace. I had carried his words like chains for so long that I almost didn't Recognize the lightness of being free. For the first time, my days weren't consumed by anger, grief, or schemes, and with that freedom came a question. I hadn't asked in years, what do I want for myself? At first, I didn't know where to start. I had spent so much of my life as a mother, and then as a broken survivor, and then as a strategist of revenge. Who was I when stripped of all those roles? So I started small. I took long walks, not to escape pain, but to breathe in life. I tried new foods, laughed at new movies, let myself smile at strangers. I visited places I hadn't gone in years, simply because they made me happy. Every little thing was a seed, seeds of a new life, and slowly those seeds began to grow. One morning, I stood in front of the mirror. Again, this time the woman staring back didn't need affirmations. She didn't need to whisper strength into her reflection. She was strong. She was whole, I realized. I no longer looked for the scars on my eyes. I looked for the light, and it was there. A quiet glow born not from others, but from within myself. I smiled, not a sharp smile, not a victorious smile, just a simple, genuine one happiness. Didn't come in grand gestures, it came in little things. The taste of tea on a cool morning, the laughter of children playing in a park, the warmth of sunlight falling across my face. For so long I had ignored these things, buried under sorrow and rage. Now they felt like treasures. I wrote in my journal. Maybe the real revenge is not in breaking him. Maybe. The real revenge is in living fully and showing that his cruelty didn't end me, it rebirthed me. What about him? By now his presence had faded completely from my life. He no longer haunted my nights. He no longer consumed my thoughts. He had become what? He always should have been a distant figure, powerless over me. And in that realization, I felt a deeper freedom. Because true power isn't in destroying someone else. It's in no longer needing them at all with. Freedom came possibility. I started writing. Stories not just about pain, but about hope, survival, and strength. I discovered that my voice, once silenced, could inspire others. I made new connections, friendships, born not from obligation or blood, but from choice, people who saw me for who I was. Not for what I had lost. I even began to dream again. Dreams of traveling, of creating, of living boldly. Dreams I had once buried beneath motherhood and sorrow. The world felt wide again, and for the first time I believed it was mine to explore one. Evening sitting with my journal, I wrote, "He told me to die, but in truth his words made me live. They forced me to shed the old skin, to rise from the ashes, to claim the life I should have always lived. Pain was my teacher, revenge was my bridge, but freedom is my home." That was the lesson. Not that revenge is sweet, but that revenge clears the path for something greater, rebirth. And so my story didn't end with revenge, it began with it. The woman I am now is not broken. She is not waiting for love or validation. She is not defined by betrayal. She is strong, she is free, she is alive, and her life is only just beginning. Storm has passed, the web has fallen, the scars remain, but they no longer bleed because the story isn't about him anymore. It's about me, my strength, my freedom, my beginning. And that is the truest victory of all. Every story leaves something behind. Pain leaves scars, survival leaves strength, revenge leaves balance, but beyond all of that comes legacy. This is not just about what I endured or even how I rose. It's about what my story gives to the world, the proof that even in betrayal, there's rebirth. When I look back now, it feels like watching another lifetime. The night he told me to die, the month of silence, the fire of transformation, the slow weaving of the web, the confrontation face to face, the aftermath of peace. Each chapter of my life feels carved into stone, heavy, permanent, but also necessary, because without each piece I would not be who I am today. And who I am today is no longer defined by his cruelty, but by my own strength. Pain teaches in ways comfort never can. It strips you down. It shows you who you are when there is nothing left. For me, pain taught 3 lessons. People reveal themselves in their cruelty. His words showed me a truth I had ignored, that love can wither when taken for granted. Silence is not weakness. That month of solitude was not my end. It was my forging. Power can be reborn, even from betrayal, even. From ashes, we can rise stronger than before. These lessons are my legacy, not just for me, but for anyone who has ever felt broken, unwanted, or dismissed. As I rebuilt my life, I realized my story was not just mine to keep. I began sharing not the details of revenge, not the bitterness, but the lessons I spoke to women who felt invisible in their families, to friends who thought they were too broken to continue, to strangers who carried scars behind their smiles. I told them, you are not as powerless as you think. Silence can be strength. Pain can be your teacher, and even if someone throws you away, you can rise brighter, stronger, freer. And every time someone's eyes lit with recognition, every time a tear fell, because they understood, I felt it, the true power of legacy. One evening I stood in front of the mirror again, the same mirror where I had once whispered survival, the same mirror where I had declared my rebirth. Now I stood not in pain, not in revenge, but in peace. The woman staring back at me didn't need to whisper anymore. She didn't need to remind herself of her strength, because she was strength. And I realized the mirror was no longer my witness. The world was. If there is one thing I want my story to leave behind, it is this: no one has the right to tell you that you are nothing. No one has the right to decide whether you live or die, not with their words, not with their cruelty, because your life is yours, your strength is yours, and your rebirth is yours. If someone breaks, you let yourself break, but don't stay broken, rise. If someone dismisses you, let yourself grieve, but don't stay invisible. Reclaim yourself. If someone tells you to die, live louder. That is legacy. Revenge was a step necessary, perhaps, but legacy is not about revenge. It's about what comes after. I don't want to be remembered as a woman who destroyed her son's pride. I want to be remembered as a woman who rebuilt herself when the world tried to bury her. I want to be remembered as proof that betrayal does not define you, but how you rise from it does. And so I set my story free, not locked in a journal, not hidden in shadows, but shared so that others may find themselves in its words. Because legacy is not just what you live, it's what you give. And if even one person broken in silence hears my story and decides to rise, then my legacy is fulfilled. The story began with cruelty. It passed through silence, fire, and revenge. It ended not with destruction, but with rebirth, because my legacy is not pain. It is strength, it is freedom, it is hope. And that is how I want to be remembered. Not as the woman who was told to die, but as the woman who chose to live.